Thank you for listening to this episode of the Insurance Brokers Podcast. Today's episode is a slightly different format to our usual, and we are really excited to be joined by a panel of fabulous people. Mike Keating from the MGAA, David Williams of AXA, and Graeme Mackenzie of MBL Global. Today's topic will all be around corporate social responsibility and how we as an industry can make an impact. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I am sure that everybody listening will recognise names and faces and companies, so I won't do a whole big thing on introductions. But David joining us from AXA, Mike joining us from the MGAA, and Graeme joining us from MBL Global. I'm really grateful to have you all here.
Pleasure to be here, Sarah.
Good afternoon.
So I'm just going to give you a bit of background about why I thought this would be an interesting podcast to do. There's so much happening in the news at the moment about mental health. There is so much happening in the news about corporate social responsibility. And there is so much happening in our industry, which is quite innovative. And I've had a few really interesting conversations recently about new sort of things being put in place to help the wider community. So I thought it'd be really interesting to have a conversation around corporate social responsibility from a risk management perspective. And the reason is, obviously, our industry is there at the point of a disaster. Arguably, that's why it exists. So that sort of lends itself really well to supporting nations globally whenever there's any of these sort of big disasters. And that's why I wanted Graeme to come on as well, because Graeme, your background is technical underwriting, but also particularly around this kind of space. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really the positioning. That's why I wanted to have a chat. And it probably makes sense just to get an overview from you guys about what you've seen in the industry over the last few years and what you see coming in terms of corporate social responsibility, either within your organizations or more generally. David, do you want to jump in first?
Yeah, certainly. So I suppose my experiences are, currently I'm responsible for underwriting and technical services, but I ran claims for 9 years, and you genuinely see our purpose, our reason for existing when you're involved with a claims team. And it isn't just about the financial elements. I think if you look at the movement of people between different teams, you tend to find that people who are in claims stay in claims. And I think that's because you need a particular mindset, and also you like, being honest, the fact that you are able to help people. And certainly when we're coaching people, it's not just about, processing calls, processing claims. It's not just about systems. It is trying to understand the customers. And initially, you do have to script it. You do have to remind, new joiners that somebody's been through a particularly, stressful moment, and that we're there to assist them. And clearly, we want our customers to be our customers for a long time. And, claims is the opportunity to either sort of reinforce that or lose them forever by handling things badly. I also think we're quite fortunate within the AXA group because we have AXA Health, your PPP as was. So we have healthcare professionals within the group, and we share a lot of things generally. And also, I think what you do within your business impacts what you do outside. So we have things like the AXA Research Fund, which we might come on to later, which gives us access to expertise because we're funding it, researching all sorts of areas, and certainly climate, life sciences, the mental health impacts of these events is part of that. But also, we have been obsessed with employee well-being. So within my team, I have somebody who is one of what we call our mental health first aiders. And they're not trained professionals from a proper sort of a medical perspective, but they are members of staff, sometimes quite senior. Mine is a direct report, so very senior, relatively speaking, and they are there to try and help our employees on an informal basis, and that's what we call it, mental health first aiders, because we're not trying to replace proper services and facilities, but that I think helps us in terms of if we recognise that we have a responsibility to look after our employees, that naturally drifts into our customers as well. And for an intro, I probably talked too much already, so I'll shut up then.
That's unlike you, David.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I've written a couple of things to come back to that I think are really relevant. I just want to get your input, Mike and Graeme, as well. Mike, your background is across all different parts of the industry, isn't it? But currently you're in a membership organisation. So if we're talking about employee welfare, or we're talking about client support, or we're talking about membership welfare, how do you sit with what David said?
Yeah, I don't. Well, most surprisingly, I actually agree with David, which I didn't when all the time we worked together at AXA, but that's another sort of story. But I probably come at it at sort of a different angle. So I think CSR, has to be led from the top. It has to be led from boardrooms. And it's very much sort of what I've seen, that it used to be a little bit of a tick box exercise. Okay. And, but now, you see that, corporate governance and the need to have a real interactive CSR sort of policy, which is cascaded down, and therefore big organisations such as AXA, and it's really encouraging to hear what David said with his examples, that they're not only walking the walk, but they're talking the talk in terms of doing it, and taking that into sort of key departments, such as claims, so that the end customer actually sort of feels the warmth and that sort of CSR sort of responsibility from that perspective. I'm sure we'll come back to it. It'll be interesting, certainly from Graeme and David's view, is to, when you bring in sort of risk management, whether CSR and risk managers are actually integrated or whether they're separate, because I think that would be quite an interesting discussion to see whether they're still working in silos, because they should be aligned in sort of my view. But certainly sort of from a MGAA sort of perspective, we have a number of our sort of as you know, so a number of our suppliers sort of offer sort of CFR sort of guidance or the themes, policies, and really interactive. And I can only speak for our 160 odd members that they treat that enormously seriously. But again, I would have to say that I think it's something which has really taken on a high profile, but wasn't necessarily sort of, enacted as serious as it maybe 10 years ago.
I like you've both kind of picked up on this. Corporate social responsibility is now starting, and I think COVID's got an awful lot to say for that, to infiltrate into and cascade down into the actual client-facing employee benefits. So it's almost well-being, not just to the outer world, but to your own organisation, is starting to be taken much, much, much more seriously. Is there more we could do? And I imagine, Graeme, you've got some thoughts on what David and Mike have said, and what other things could be done.
Well, I think there's lots that could be done. I think it's all about having as both Mike and David have said, it's having the management commitment to actually going and doing it. And I have to say, before we get into sort of anything else, I'm absolutely delighted that we are having a conversation about sort of corporate social responsibility in this type of forum. We're raising the issue, and particularly as far as we are concerned with the sort of the mental health aspect of sort of CSR post an event. And I think what we see as a sort of a supplier, if you like, to the financial services industry, is that because CSR has largely been sort of self-regulatory almost, it's different businesses have taken a different approach to how they, to use your words, Mike, tick the boxes. And, I think some have climbed in, sort of boots and all, have appointed senior management, to actually who are tasked with developing the sort of the CSR ability of their institution. Gallagher's would be a really good example of that. And I think if you look across the insurers, MGAs, UMAs globally, you'll see everything from sort of philanthropy to tick a box through to sort of micro insurance product design, right the way through to some interesting examples actually in South Africa, by way of a couple of the larger insurers here have put pointsmen or traffic policemen effectively on junctions as part of their CSR initiative to help guide traffic through the busy periods. They're trained by the police. They wear the high vis jacket with their insurer logo on, and they direct the traffic every morning. They're in front of thousands of people, and it's a great example of how corporate social responsibility dovetails into kind of brand development and extension, public awareness, and so on. So there's a number of those very sort of macro and micro sort of issues. And again, in South Africa, one of the other insurers here decided to take it upon themselves to go around and fix all the potholes in the road. Those are very kind of local and in some cases quite sort of micro initiatives. But I do think it's a great way that you can blend your CSR sort of you'll want to develop corporate social responsibility with a way in which you can enhance your brand, increase your reach, and do good for society. And as Sarah said, I think insurers are fantastically placed at the point of a claim to really extend that CSR initiative. And I was called yesterday, and I'm not sure if this is a compliment or not, I was called an ethical evangelist. So part of what I'm trying to drive is to drive the whole profile of CSR in an insurance, in an insurance environment. And there's a saying that I've used on several occasions, which is, harm can never be totally washed away by money. What can we do after the event to actually affect positively those people that are affected by the event? And that event could be anything from wildfires to flooding to a terrorist event. How can we, as the insurer who are on site, pick up the mantle and push this philosophy of development of CSR? So that's my background. As I say, I feel a little bit sort of poacher turned gamekeeper, or the other way around. I'm not quite sure what it should be. But so we're very much in the space of pushing CSR, however it appears, whether it's environmental, economic, or social, further down the track for insurers.
Could I just pose a question to both David, sort of given the size of AXA and obviously Graham's? Do you feel you're sort of through your both your lenses, especially sort of David with the size of AXA, do you feel you're still in the cycle at prevention, or are you actually prevention after it's happened, or are you looking to predict it before it happens?
Yeah, so I think we're very much moving to trying to prevent it happening in the first place, ahead of the incident. Some of the old strap lines, we wanted to move from payer to partner because we don't want our customers to be suffering. And, as Graeme said, no amount of money can really make up for what people have had to go through. So, very much trying to do things in advance. I mean, we've got a team of 40 to 50 risk engineers who do operate separately from the CSR team, but probably their interaction is really strong, and the number of interactions between CSR and the risk management team is probably greater than anything else. I also think we talked about things changing. We got into a situation as an industry where COVID happened, and the vast majority of people didn't have any cover at all. And you're thinking, well, what can we do? Now, bunging money randomly clearly isn't sustainable. Although we've contributed to various funds, I think we paid £1 million into one fund that the ABI were organising. We're supporting other things elsewhere in the world. But what we did as a team is we thought, what can we do with our expertise to help our customers? So yes, there was an element in terms of what can you do to extend policy cover. So allowing somebody who's just got a private car policy to be able to use that vehicle for ferrying patients around, or delivering prescriptions, doing shopping, things like that. And more basic things like empty buildings cover extended like that. But also what we thought about is, what can we do to help our customers just cope without there being cover under a policy? So providing additional information, being available to offer advice. And I think that really accelerated. The other thing I was sort of holding myself back from saying at the start is, I think anybody now who still sees CSR as being a tick box exercise is an idiot, frankly, because there are so many benefits. Now, I've worked for AXA for forever, pretty much. And I've always said, one of the reasons I've stayed at AXA is we try and do the right thing. And what I really mean by that is, I don't turn up to work and think, oh my God, what's this shocking organisation? It's an organisation who, through various things, are trying to help, trying to make a difference. And I am told that millennials, who are clearly a very different age group to me, it's even more important to them. They don't just want to know, job title and a salary. They want to be working for an organisation where they can understand the strategy and see how that fits in to the wider environment and big global issues. I mean, we always used to talk about our noble purpose, and now we're talking about trying to make the right decisions for human advancement. I mean, we're an international group, so sometimes things get a bit lost in translation. But we really genuinely want to be doing the right thing. And that, I think, enables us to attract and keep better people. And also, when people are actually in doing their jobs, if they feel they're part of something bigger and that is trying to make a difference.
Yeah, Dave, sorry, I'll probably have to sort of, I think that's great, okay, but with the High Court case Supreme Court case on BI, the reputation of insurers is effectively as low as lawyers and probably solicitors.
Yeah.
So what you've just said, I would challenge from an SME perspective to say, well, actually, all of that, we want to do the right thing, blah, 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 doesn't quite equate with, the Supreme High Court, where insurers were clearly trying to get out of paying valid claims.
Yeah, so
they just don't match up. I'm sorry, they just don't match up.
And some insurers were challenging elements. We weren't. We were. I was personally involved in discussions with the regulator from pretty much day one, and we told them what we're doing, and that was, these policies have cover, we're paying them, and we've paid a lot of money out already. We're making interim payments as quickly as we can. These don't, for these reasons, blah, blah, blah. And because of that, the FCA didn't want us involved in the Supreme Court case. That doesn't mean to say that our reputation hasn't been impacted. And, like I say, I can go on and on about what we've done and how we did pay out promptly, and how we weren't one of those insurers trying to wriggle out, as some people say. But the reality is, the insurance industry's reputation has been damaged, and therefore we need to do whatever we can, because otherwise what's going to happen is people are not going to bother to buy insurance. And then what's going to happen? They're going to have a fire, they're going to have a flood, and they're going to be left completely without any protection and support, and they're going to fall to the government, the local authority. So I agree with you absolutely in terms of the damage. I'm embarrassed by some of the behaviours, but then let's be honest, you and I, we've worked together, we know what the market's like. It's not unusual, and unfortunately it's the lowest common denominator. It tends to influence our reputation. What we got to do now is fight really hard to rebuild. And it wasn't great beforehand, let's not pretend. But from an even lower point, we need to do whatever we can to make people recognise the value that we bring.
Can I ask what you both think? Because it's highly related to this reputational thing, which absolutely is linked with corporate social responsibility, as we've obviously just discussed. But what do you think of Zurich's recent add-on to flooding policies whereby they've launched trauma care for anybody who's had to claim because of a flood and has suffered from trauma because of it. What do you think of that in terms of corporate social responsibility, client care, brand building, whichever way you want to spin it?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good move. I mean, years ago, we saw some American research which talked about the mental impact on people involved in large flood claims. Clearly, they have some quite dramatic incidents in the States. And therefore, I think the more that we can do to, when there's an incident, you want your customers to be looked after. You want to retain your customers. And the sad fact is that a huge proportion of businesses that suffer a big event don't continue to trade for one reason or another. They end up ceasing to trade. I think being able to provide additional services is great, and I think in terms of the various boxes that you talked about, not from a tick box exercise, but in terms of improving how you're perceived, I think it scores in all of those.
Could I give two sort of anecdotes or examples just to throw out there and ask for your sort of thoughts on? So I am, for my sins, in the process of launching another business, and it is all around mental health, scenario-based psychoeducation for professionals, and it's really exciting. And I've been doing a lot of research, and one of the things that I came across was the Asian Disaster Preparedness Centre, who did a huge study on the 2004 tsunami. And it looked at it from a sort of the financial and the economic impact right through to the social impact on people with PTSD, people who had lost their jobs, lost a limb, mentally couldn't go back to work, or, had to leave work 3 years later because of the psychological scarring. And one of the things that it said was that the psychological scars from the people who were involved in this tsunami will still be being seen by 2085. I mean, that's assuming people live very long, obviously. But that statistic, and I don't know where they got it from, so take it with a pinch of salt, but that statistic I think is very powerful. And when you put it in terms of these two events I'm about to describe, I'd really love your thoughts on whether the insurance industry could and should help here. So I have a friend who was in Thailand, and she got a ferry from one of the islands back to mainland, and the ferry, something caught fire, and the ferry sunk, and they all had to jump overboard into the ocean and then wait for lifeboats. Incredibly traumatic event. And also the 2016 Sri Lankan bombings, the hotels that were involved in that. And actually, Graeme, you'll be better placed to talk about this, because I know you guys had some relation to that, and you can probably give a bit more information. But the support that was then, nothing was given to Penny, and she suffered with PTSD for a very long time. I know there was support given to the people affected by that bombing, and it came from the sort of insurance industry. So that information, what do you think about it? How could we do more? And how does it tie in really to what Zurich are offering? Because I know Zurich's underpinned by the same people that the Sri Lankan bombing was underpinned by.
You've raised 3 or 4 issues in there, and I was trying to write them down as you were going. And by the way, people in Japan are likely to live far longer than anywhere else pretty much in the world right now. They've got the lowest mortality rate in pretty much globally, I think.
And it's got a name, Iki.
Well, here's something to edit out of this podcast. And in Japan, they sell more adult nappies than they do to kids. So
I'm not editing that out. That is an interesting statistic.
It gives you a sense.
Right, I'm not going to ask you where you got that fact from.
And again, and I'm not going to hair split with you. The Sri Lankan bombing was actually in 2019, so not 2016.
Just turn the 6 the other way. It's fine.
So I think, just to come back to where you were, Sarah, there's no doubt that COVID has encouraged insurers, as we speak to them, to raise the whole concept of mental awareness has been heightened by COVID because of the mental health issues that it throws up around loss of loved ones, confinement, etc., loss of job, and so on. So mental health as a subject has been raised quite considerably. I think one of the challenges that many insurers are trying to balance is how to develop CSR strategies, but at the same time, it not necessarily be just a cost center. What's almost a case of what's in it for me? How can I develop something which is going to bring, valuable additional benefits to my business, and whether that is brand awareness or data based on the incident in terms of who's managing this and so on and so forth. If we take an incident, for example, around Sri Lanka, that Sri Lanka bombing, and from memory now, there were 3 hotels affected in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, and I think 3 police stations, and all told, something like about 500. I think probably about I think about 500 people were injured and about 300 people were killed. The insurers that were involved in underwriting those risks were very quickly on the scene, with security companies that were there to assist people. What we saw around sort of the human cost of this is that people that were affected by those bombings, which took place in April 2019, some were still being counselled directly over the event a year later. Some people managed to recover very quickly, i.e. after sort of 1 or 2 counselling sessions, but many were affected on a long-term basis. And I think where we see an insurer's, in part, responsibility around developing CSR is to have a better understanding of what the human cost is to this. How quickly can not we get the employees that were affected back to work, but if you take the case of that Sri Lankan bombing, for example, probably less than 10% of the people that were actually psychologically affected were employees. 90% were people that just happened to be in the vicinity, were tourists or whatever. But these people were looking for some form of counselling, some form of comfort immediately post the event. And one of the drivers that we are trying to encourage insurers to look at is, yes, by all means, look at the employees, get the employees back to work as quickly as possible, reduce your BI claims. And we were talking about BI as being an issue, but at the same time, deal with the other people that were affected by the incident. For example, if you look at a typical terrorist type sort of product or a policy, most insurers will cover the peripheral damage within typically a 250 or 300 meter radius of that. So how can we get the insurers to pick up that mantle and deal with the less tangible aspects of these incidents? And I think that what we've seen is a heightened awareness of CSR brought around by COVID, but we have also seen, in the right way, what's in it for me as the insurer? What can if I enhance my corporate social responsibility, what can I get back? How can I convert that CSR into more customers, brand enhancement, data that's valuable to me as a business? What can we do? And that, I think, is part of the conundrum, and that will move people away from Mike's point, which I agree with, of box ticking. So because then there's actually a commercial benefit to a corporate social responsibility program, which could actually far outweigh the cost of the program itself.
Yeah,
I'd love both of your thoughts on that.
I suppose my observation on, and probably question to David again, is that, and I know what he's like to say about AXA, but we'll ask him to give a whole market approach. So you have I think David mentioned floods. So can CSR and claims mitigation, i.e. sort of, reduction in indemnity, can they go, are they sort of ideal bed partners, or because of your requirements to hit your COR, to mitigate claims, that actually claims mitigation through indemnity has to take priority over CSR? Can you do it equally as an insurer?
Okay, so shall I give you my views on this? And I think that there is no point having a conversation where we all just have a love-in and ignore the realities of business. So I think,
well, I'm trying to get you going. Yeah,
exactly. So the reason why we're all on the call, I think, is because we all do have a commitment to CSR and want our businesses to be doing the right thing. But the reality is they are businesses, okay? And it's because when you were talking about travel insurance earlier on, I despair at times about travel insurance. Mike, you said I'm allowed to talk about the market. It's not AXA, obviously. But you can get a travel policy for like threepence halfpenny, is I would say. You sit on the tube in the old days, we could commute, and you'd see a little advert opposite offering you a year's travel insurance cover for the price of a couple of pints. The reality is, whoever is providing that is not going to be able to provide all the bells and whistles. And that's the other thing I would say in terms of, you are a business, but also you're making a decision as a consumer. Do you want to be charged for bells and whistles and frills, or do you want the option to have something that, quite frankly, is going to send you a check if you're lucky and do very little more than that? So, I mean, I'm an underwriter at heart. Like I was in claims for 9 years and loved every moment of it. But numbers is what I do. Working out, hopefully, how we can make money. Now, what I do is I go beyond the pure maths of thinking about expected loss costs and all those sorts of elements, and I recognise that we're in a really good position to be able to help out, and that's why I think sometimes people think insurers should do more than just exercise the limits of the legally binding contract. But also there are benefits in terms of, as I've said, you're being able to maintain customers. Stop businesses from going bust, because if they're bust, they're not your customer anymore. Brand, I mean, we have to be honest and say, it is part of your brand, your reputation, how you respond in these ways. So I don't think it's right that people should expect insurers to pick up any costs in any way related miles away from the contract that somebody's chosen to take out. But I do think that morally it's right to help as much as we can, and there are some tremendous benefits from that are more than just the sort of loss costs in terms of maintaining customers, brand and reputation, employee satisfaction, all those sorts of things. And I think maybe that hasn't been recognised as much as it could have been in the past. And the good news is that people are seeing that now, and therefore that is enabling them to be able to contribute more to what was previously seen as a loss cost. But you have to remember, and I get this thrown at me by claimant lawyers all the time, that we have a responsibility as directors and officers of a business to the shareholders. So we're not charities. We can't just go out and chuck money about, and therefore it is important that we do the right thing, and also we can explain the benefits so that we are free to be able to do maybe a little bit more than the contract strictly requires us to do.
I would, this is coming back to my ethical evangelism again, so my apologies. I would advocate that the contract and corporate social responsibility should actually not be mutually exclusive. I think that, contracts of insurance should, by choice from the insurers, include some form of corporate social responsibility, however that might look, limited as it might be. But, I think any form of CSR, I think is positive. And I guess the sort of the proof of the pudding would be, whether, a customer would view more favourably a contract offer or an offer of a policy that included some form of CSR initiative versus one that didn't. And I understand the commercial drivers around, new business, cost sensitivity, and so on. I think where we sit, from sort of our sort of position, is that I think we want to encourage, however it is, we want to encourage the insurers to incorporate some form of CSR benefit in the contract, so that you can abide by the contract and you can provide some form of perhaps social, environmental, mental rehabilitation alongside what is clearly really important, the financial rehab of the customer, because those issues themselves also drive consumer behavior back to that customer. We've got evidence that says if your insured client is being seen through you to be offering some form of CSR, some form of initiative which is helping to kind of deal with the damage of whatever the event may be, people are drawn to their business, which gets their business back, sort of on track more quickly. It could potentially reduce litigation. I mean, we've got examples of events that have taken place, for example, in the US, where because the insured client has been seen to take positive action post the event, and in these cases, I'm actually talking about, these are specific terrorist or active assailant events that have taken place on school campuses and so on. But because the school, through its insurer, is able to facilitate some form of CSR initiative, we've actually seen cases where class litigation has been dropped because the business is actually is being seen to be doing the right thing. It's not just about the indemnity and getting us back to where we were operationally. There's a slightly wider rim to the level of service that's being provided, and not one. And I'm not talking from our perspective, whether it's mental, social, environmental, the cost needn't be, because it's the law of large numbers, the cost needn't be prohibitive to an insured client. And again, we are of a view that says the insurer is there. You are present. You are the go-to person immediately after the aftermath of whatever the event is. You make sure that your family and your possessions are safe. You make sure that your friends are safe. And then when the drama has calmed down, you're looking for your insurance policy. And so you're engaging with a customer right at the very outset of this. And we think there's an opportunity for insurers to embrace a CSR initiative, within the structure of their contract.
I think that's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. I suppose the other sort of just adding on to that is, would an insurer, so the opportunity that provides differentiation in a product, number one. Would an insurer, the real innovative insurers would perhaps buy that in and embed it in their contracts, and then just have a relationship with the provider and not have it as an add-on? Because then that would come to David's valid points around building brand, being very serious about CSR, actually having it embedded in their products. That I think is all on the positive side. I think at the same period through an insurer lens, is that if they're buying in that product so it's embedded, and depending on whatever product it was put in, could that make them uncompetitive when they built that into their pricing in what is a extremely competitive market? And I think that's always the balance, coming back to what we've all talked about around, David's, again, valid point around, they are businesses, they have sort of returns, obligations to shareholders, they need to hit their sort of financial targets, they need to grow top line new business, deliver sort of best in class loss ratios, and all that is sort of weighing, how much CSR can we sort of try and pull in. But I think the real innovative insurer will grasp it and say, actually, all the benefits which have been articulated outweigh the fact that we might not write as much new business because our brand, our profile, the halo effect should get us to where we need to get to anyway. So I think it's a great idea. I think it's an opportunity for insurers to sort of, you know, seize the opportunity. Personally,
I think from our perspective, you know, I mean, we talk about trying to, it's a bit of a cliche, but we talk about trying to create sort of solidarity, if you like, in the risk pool, in the risk takers, you know, to get, you know, and what, I mean, in an ideal world, you would have, you know, all the insurers take their, you know, a step forward at the same time and create sort of equilibrium sort of in the market space. You know, that's never going to happen. As you say, Mike, you know, some insurers are happier to grasp the nettle than others in different ways, whether it's through product innovation or not. I think one of the things that we also see in terms of benefiting insurers is that there is very little, and I can only talk with any experience around the mental health issues here. I can't talk about environmental or educational, for example, but from a mental health perspective, we know that after many of these events, in fact, 99.9% of all major events, whether it's a flood, an earthquake, a terrorist attack, whatever it may be, there is no accumulated data available to anybody around the human cost of that event. What was the human cost of that event? No one knows. You know, an example that I have used, we have a clinical social worker that works for us. Her daughter was at the Ariana Grande concert. You may recall a couple of years ago in Manchester at the GMEX. If you just take that as an event, and I could name 1,000 events, after that event took place, what did the local authority, the insurer of the GMEX, the government do to help the individuals affected, traumatized by that event, young kids, most of them? The short answer is nothing. No one knows how many people were affected. Nobody knows the cost on business of those people because of, you know, nobody has any sense of what the number of people that were affected, the ethnicity of those people affected, the period over which they were affected, how severely they were affected. No one knows. And we think that kind of information is socially responsible, not just for local government, but it's really vital information that as an insurer, you could feed back into your healthcare department, into your actuarial department, and looking at some of your pricing models to get a better grasp of what's going on. And to Sarah's earlier point of, you know, the tsunami, I have no idea because we were not involved in it, but that tsunami will undoubtedly affect thousands of people for many years, I'm sure. But nobody can actually tell you. And we see that as a shortcoming. And I'm talking now with my underwriting hat on. I just believe that as underwriters and as sort of custodians of the care of those people that are affected, we should have that information. And in order to have that information, you've got to have a service of some description which allows you to gather it. And then from a brand perspective afterwards, and we've seen this in many places globally, if you are the person that has that information, and again, I can only talk around the mental health issue, you then become the de facto expert on mental health issues in that country after an event. You know, your publicity department are getting calls from journalists to provide informed commentary on events and so on. So there's a lot of soft benefits that can come out of CSR, however it's manufactured and distributed and bought into by the public.
I definitely think that there is a gap, but I think we need to do two things. One, we need to be clear about who should be responsible for what. I don't think the local authority or the National Health Service not doing something means insurers should instantly pick it up. But I also think what we need to do is we need to be able to put a price on those soft benefits. The reason I say that is because, if we are going to include certain things, so an hour of time with a medical professional costs money. And therefore, if you need to build that into a product, you need to build that into the pricing. Yep. And as somebody's already said, that can make you uncompetitive. I mean, I've seen motor premiums. People will change insurer for 50 pence. I've seen a 0.5% adjustment in rate will apparently impact your conversion stats by 7%. It's that price sensitive. Now that's motor, which is particularly price sensitive, but you get the gist. So I think what we need to do is we need to be establishing the value of these soft benefits. I mean, we need to be doing some things anyway, because it's the right thing to do. And I've talked about, employee satisfaction and brand and all those sorts of things. But if we can actually put a value on these soft benefits, it's then easier to sell them. I like the idea of there being let's call it a CSR element in the policy contract, because one of the other things we've learned over the last 18 months is we shouldn't have uncertainty. People should know what's going to be paid and what isn't. So, CSR, if there are elements that we might regard as CSR that we're definitely going to deal with, then let's build them into the policy contract. Let's work out the value of them, because that will then help us sell that product, which might be a little bit more expensive to the general public.
I also think there's an element of which vertical you're talking about. You've just mentioned motor there, but presumably in terrorism policies or political violence, kidnap, ransom, activist, whatever it might be, this type of movement has, an awful lot of benefit.
Kidnap and ransom is such a specialist line. Nobody really sells kidnap and ransom. Nobody buys kidnap and ransom other than certain real specialists.
Unless you're going to get kidnapped.
Well, exactly. It tends to be foreign diplomats and the like. And terrorism, from a UK perspective, is managed generally by Paul Ree. I mean, I know there are other Lloyd's-based facilities, but the full cover, including chemical and biological attacks, is only available, I think, via Paul Ree. So, but it would be useful for them to have that information. But again, I mean, it's thrown in on household covers, terrorism cover. It's not charged for. So if you're going to be providing additional services, and if you're almost going to be setting yourself up to, try and fill in the shortcomings of other bodies, that's going to get expensive.
Very off the cuff anecdote. My daughter told me this morning that if somebody wanted to kidnap her, all they'd have to do was paint a white van in the Hogwarts Express colours and she'd be right in there, which concerned me on many levels. Firstly, that she's thinking of it, and secondly, she's planned her own kidnap. Yes. So I shall refer her to kidnap and ransom policies should I need to. I think that has been so interesting, guys. I'm really grateful, and I love some of the interaction and prodding, Mike, that I've seen you doing, because it makes for a lively debate.
Just finishing off, and David, this will make David smile, and it just shows sort of how far CSR has come, and even from my own personal experience. So when I was working with David at AXA, and David will remember the date better than me, so I think it was the 2006 or 7 floods. Some very bright individuals within AXA said, why don't we send a burger van to the flood site and actually just serve people burgers or
bacon sandwiches, it was.
Hot tea. Yeah. And that was, was that 2006, David?
Yeah.
So that's what, 15 years ago. And at the time, I would have to say the general view across most of the office, not exclusively, was, what the hell are we doing sending a burger van when people's properties are half underwater? So to me, that for me personally, that's a classic where CSR has come on so much further, because we just focused on, well, who's going to want to eat a burger, when actually they'd rather have sort of, drying out sort of stuff. But again, that goes back, 15 years. And I just think it's come an awful long way. But, 15 years ago, that was the case.
Anyway. See, the joy of the van was it got through. So a big insurer, beginning with A in the UK, have a battle bus. So, big coach fitted with all sorts of things, satellite, telephones, all that sort of thing. And it couldn't get through because of the flooding. whereas our little van got through, set up in a car park in a sort of shopping area, and then at one point in time, it was actually visited by Prince Charles, our future king.
It's incredible.
Well, there you go.
Take it all back about the van, both of you.
but it was bacon sandwiches. We couldn't stretch to burgers, Mike and I.
I'd go with bacon sandwiches every time.
Yeah.
With or without brown sauce. Got to have HP sauce on your bacon sandwich, though.
Ketchup every time. No, that's really great, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Good
See you.
Cheers.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.